Hey everyone, Temporal here, and for this session we are going to be doing a tier list or power rankings, however we want to think about it, on the Overwatch maps. This is definitely going to be highly subjective. I don't pretend there's any way to make it otherwise, and my favorites will end up on top, my least favorites will end up on bottom. That said, I will talk through what goes into maps being my favorite and least favorite, and I think there will be a lot of things we can agree on. The placement of King's Row will probably not be one of them. But here we go. If you guys have questions or want to yell at me and tell me I'm wrong, go ahead and throw them up in chat there. So, to start with, we're going to get the worst map in Overwatch, and that is going to be Paris. So, gonna mauled if any 2CP map makes it above C. Well, you might mauled then. You might mauled. That said, we're gonna start with a couple 2CP maps, and our first map here is going to be Paris. Paris is just a bad map, guys. Like, there's a reason it was disabled. That first choke sucks. No, there's a reason it was disabled. It shouldn't have been released into the game. It does not work. We could potentially do a tier break before putting the Watchpoint here, or excuse me, not Watchpoint, before putting Horizon. Horizon is a fair bit better of a map than Paris, and I won't say that I love to play it or anything, but it is better than Paris simply because hey, that choke on second isn't quite as bad. There's actually ways to deal with you're far enough away from the opponents when you're dealing with that big open space on first that you've got to rotate through. There's a few more tools. First point can still be brutal, but it's not as bad as Paris. And second point has a little bit of interest with hey, especially if the redesign on second, there's ways to actually rotate around that point, do things. There's the fun little beam that moves back and forth that you can sit up on top of on the map. Like, it's got some redeeming aspects, even if it is still not a good map. Second point is pretty good on Paris. Who knows? Who would know? Who would know that second point is any good on Paris? Because, you have to get past first point to play second point. I'm kidding, but it's bad. Okay. Then we move on to the third map that I believe belongs in this tier. This one's going to be a little more controversial, but Hanamura is not a good map. If Hanamura had not been released with the game, if Hanamura had not been in the game on release, I think Hanamura would have been vetoed and would have had as much outcry as these other two maps. It is not a good map. Second point, Hanamura is stupid. There are things you can do in terms of going, oh, hey, we will fake a rotation mid, drop, loop around. Oh, hey, we'll do a sim TP along the left side and then go in like that. But these are like one and done type tricks to try to break it. The reality is you 85-90% of the time just have to run your head into a wall, pushing top right into a brutal top right choke that a single Junkrat, a single Mei, a Brawl comp just makes absolutely miserable to push through, but it is the right way to push it. It is not good map design. First point is fine. It's a little hard on having one choke there with the window that's going to have limited hero access, but first point ultimately is fine into something that is completely tolerable, completely fine. Having a few hard chokes in the game doesn't really bother me. It's not as bad as it's generally not considered as bad as original Eichenwald was, for example. They obviously did a rework to Eichenwald to add the door to the left from defender's perspective, right from attacker's perspective on the first point there at that first major choke. And first point Hanamura is not as bad as that one was originally. So this might be my first controversial take. I believe Hanamura belongs this low on the tier list. Second point is bad. It really doesn't make sense. That said, I am not against 2CP as a whole. And just to make that point, why don't we go ahead and get another 2CP map? And I'm perfectly happy to put Volskaya in the B tier. Volskaya is a fine map. The choke is perfectly fine. It has the trucks. It has the ability to teleport around it or go around the outside there. You can fly over the roof, so Winston can leap over the choke to get behind it. You have the ability to send people through the window just to the right of the choke. Second point has lots of different routes into it. It's got a left route up using the escalator. It's got high ground for the attackers that's meaningful but not overpowering. It's got a choke of sorts. Volskaya is just a good map. There's nothing like, oh my goodness, this is the best map ever, let's put it up in S tier, but it's a good average map. It does not have the issues that most 2CP maps have, other than the standard issue of, oh hey, the 2CP game mode can be a little snowbally, kind of like Koth can be a little snowbally. Or swingy anyways. Winning the first fight in Koth can make it extremely swingy, and winning just 2 fights in 2CP can or one fight, because that frequently leads to a second fight with how ults work, with how things work, can be rather swingy in that. So that's a feature, I'd say, of both game modes that can be a bit of a problem. Can be a, wait, no, these game modes are not as, how do I want to say, balanced. You can have the worst team get a bit of a lucky or a bit of a, hey, we hit a good swing type thing and do quite well, to a much greater degree than you have in Payload or Hybrid. Payload and Hybrid are both the better map types in Overwatch. That said, I'm going to be putting a lot of King of the Hills in high tiers, because King of the Hill maps do something else very, very good. Yesterday got into Diamond on Tank for the first time, thanks to your videos, Coach. What do you mean? Your tank mode Bastion wasn't already Diamond, Celeste? What do you mean? I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Congrats, man. Congrats. Volskaya is the best 2CP map. It's the least painful to play. Completely agreed. And Volskaya is strategically deep enough, map geometry deep enough, uses the dead space between the 2 points well, so it's not actually dead space. I'm good with Volskaya. That said, let's grab our last 2CP map, since we are on the topic, and I'm going to put Anubis here. Anubis is not as painful to play as the bottom 3 maps, but it's not as good as Volskaya. There's not too much to say about it. The choke at first is perfectly breakable. There's plenty of routes to go in on second. It's a workable map. It's not as good as Volskaya. Like, that's fine. That's fine is really the right answer for Anubis. It's like, yep, this is sort of the base level for an acceptable map in Overwatch. Sure, don't need to get rid of it. Would prefer something else popped. It has the drop, and then on top of those, it has the standard drawbacks that 2CP maps have of, hey, it's going to be a swingy game mode where if someone wins 2 team fights, you then have to fight against a 5-minute time bank, 4-minute time bank, even if you quickly put it together, solve it, and realize, wait, we're the better team. But now they've locked things down a tiny bit, and even though you're winning team fights, it's going to take forever, that sort of thing. So 2CP has some inherent game type problems. That said, the bad 3 that are really intolerable are these. This one is quite fine as a game. Volskaya is your favorite map in the game for some reason? Totally fair. Totally fair. Volskaya is fine. Yeah, that makes sense to me. Then we're going to move on, and let's get another map to throw up here. And if I were to throw another map up here, we're probably going to end up in Junkertown territory. Junkertown was another more recent map ad, and by more recent, I just mean it was a post-release map ad. And it's fine. Junkertown is fine. I like Junkertown. I like that Junkertown has those really long sightlines on first, and I also like that Junkertown has the loop around mechanic on third. That's going to be a bit unique, where the beginning of third point, so beginning, end, and we'll just go beginning, and I like that we effectively have this going on, and there's a quick jump between those. That's a somewhat unique feature that it has going on. It is that central high ground that's pretty easy to get to, works pretty well. It has the outside lane that is super long like this. It gets points on uniqueness for that, and it also gets points for, I am generally a fan of maps that force the player base to play a little bit differently than it's used to playing. I like it when a game is balanced not completely by, let's buff Widowmaker, let's nerf Tracer, let's buff Ball, let's nerf Reinhardt, that sort of thing. Instead of balancing like that, I like it when balance is so tight that you can go, no, the map differences are what are going to cause people to play different things, not the, balance being so out of whack. So Junkertown going, hey, we have really long sight lines and we're a map with longer sight lines than most of the rest of the game. That being a place that you're more likely to see Widows, Hanzos, that sort of thing. That's good in my mind. That's what you want. You want the map pool to be diverse enough. So I'm perfectly fine with Junkertown. It's not my personal favorite. That's not my personal favorite way of playing the game. Dive is my personal favorite way of playing the game, and my bias will show. But I like the concept of, hey, different maps in the pool are going to not demand, not like hard outright, there's no way you can do anything else, but those create the differences rather than we're going to tune the hero numbers to a degree. The hero numbers should be tuned tight enough that having map differences causes you to bring out the different heroes. Junkertown is above Anubis. That is true. On my list, Junkertown is above Anubis. So let's get another map. And you know what? We can solve this. I like Watchpoint Gibraltar. It's my favorite map. It's going to go up top. I like how much we look at Watchpoint Gibraltar in terms of, hey, I like dive. That's obviously going to factor into it some. It's also going to be a case of Watchpoint Gibraltar has a lot of strategic depth, a lot of, hey, much similar to Volskaya actually in team play, but Gibraltar has a lot of strategic depth in terms of, hey, controlling the high ground, understanding what people's positions are, and putting people in the right positions, and then just holding those positions can do a lot on that map. Now, second point can be a little brutal, I admit, for either attackers or defenders. Whoever gets control of second point, it's really hard to break back into second point, but second point also lets you do some cool things like lock the doors because they're all doors that are the correct size for Winston's divas to stand in, not let the opponents through with body blocking, that sort of thing, which is always a fun technique. The high ground is important. It's a good map that encourages dive, encourages some poke dive. I like it, and yeah, I'm willing to go with that. So when everyone else is like, yes, King's Road because brawl, 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 I go Gibraltar because dive. And yeah, that's going to be life. Blah says it's my favorite map. If you think it's not, you're wrong. I am temporal worship. I am temporal worship the scarf. This has blue box. It is the best spot in the game. If you think otherwise, you're wrong. I mean, blue box is pretty good, but so is spaceship. Let's not underestimate spaceship. You remember when Jeff said Gibraltar was in Spain? Okay. Okay. So now we move on to a map that I can perhaps more easily defend putting in this tier. And that would be Ilios. Ilios is a great map, and really what makes Ilios a great map is you have this situation with Ilios and with some of the better King of the Hill maps where you're really encouraged to, again, play the game differently on each point. I don't like it so much when you have such extreme changes that require you on hybrid and payload maps to switch comps between points because you're in the middle of a round, you'd be recharging your ult charge, it really doesn't make sense. You have to make a map very, very extreme to just be like, no matter what, switch comps off your dive into brawl for third, that sort of thing. You have to make a comp very extreme, and that's not, a map very extreme for that to be the case, and I don't really think that's good. I don't really think you want the situation where you're just encouraging, well, blow all of your ults taking the points because then you need to swap for the next point. I don't think that's particularly good design, but King of the Hill maps are going to, after the round is over, reset you anyway. So that's something where if they have map types that encourage very different playstyles, that's good, where you'd be seeing different tank comps, and if you see different tank comps, in reality, you should see different comps built around those different tank comps, that sort of thing. Ilios does a good job. It, of course, has Ruins, which, hey, Ruins, that's a super long sightline map. That's a really good excuse for Widow play to come out. Widow play coming out can mean, oh, we're going to want to bring out some dive tanks. Dive tanks generally do better there than poke tanks to help control the Widow. Okay, that makes sense. Then you might move on to Well, and Well is going to be the weird map. Well is going to be, oh, this is a bit of a weird map, but environmental map. Okay, let's bring out the Lucios for those. Maybe we'll bring out the Roadhogs to drop people in the pit. Maybe we'll bring out the Orissas, even with the lesser halt, because we don't really want to walk Reinhardt's by that well to go explore the center of the earth, that sort of thing. You could do Balls, you could do Winston's, but Orissa makes a lot of sense. You're already going to have that Roadhog on the board. This is going to encourage a completely different comp. Maybe you bring out some pharmacies for Well, that sort of thing, where, hey, it's a completely different comp and it makes sense, and we're going to play some different styles of Overwatch. And then you'd move on to your third map, and sure, you could go play a Ball, a Winston, you could come out on a Reinhardt, that's perfectly fine. Reinhardt can be relatively common for it. It really doesn't matter what you come out on there. There's enough high ground for Winston to be viable, certainly. Reinhardt is certainly going to be happy. He's got enough cover on that point to sort of turtle on the point, that sort of thing. But those first two maps play quite a bit differently than our lighthouse map when it comes to how it works and what the team is going to want to do. So I like that. I think that is good design. You're going to find something very similar on, let me find it. Come on, eyeballs. See the map. On Nepal. And this is going to be very similar in terms of what I'm going to talk about. Sanctum is going to encourage that poke style comp, but it's also going to encourage a fair amount of environmental play. That makes sense. You're going to have Village, which pretty harshly demands Brawl. Village is going to say play Brawl. You can get away softening stuff up with a poke comp, a poke dive comp rather, and then flipping the point, but it's going to encourage Brawl. And then you've got a lot of freedom on your last point there to go, hey, we're going to play what we want to play, that sort of thing. So again, I think that is good map design. Antarctica is the best dual map. Okay. I am leaving out the deathmatch maps. It's true. Echo Point Antarctica. Hey, Starsville. Then from here, let's also get in Oasis, which Oasis, I'm repeating myself at this point, but Oasis is pretty good in terms of what it does. You've got a little bit less diversity than the other maps. I may move this down a tier as we go on here, but Oasis is going to give us the situation where University pretty heavily demands Brawl. Okay, that makes sense. Then you move on to Gardens. Gardens is going to have that high ground over the point. That's something that we're interested in. We probably want some dive elements, given that there's high ground over the point, that sort of thing. You want to be able to clear them, sure. And then you've got a similar thing with City Center. So City Center and Gardens don't have the diversity that we see on Nepal and Ilios, where they've got that third map type that is more of a environmental map type. Sure, you can knock people into the freeway and cars will happen on City Center, but it's not quite the diversity there. So little less, perhaps makes it a little bit worse. Maybe we'll move this around, but for now, let's put this in the previous tier. We'll see how much we need to spread things out. That said, it's a good map. I like the map. Let's round it out with another. We have one more Koth map, don't we? Yeah, we have Busan. Busan, I'd look at and say basically the exact same thing. Busan could go really on either side of this. I'm not too picky. You've got Sanctum, that's the one with the drum. You could certainly play dive there. You really couldn't play brawl. You've got long enough sight lines to play poke. Sure, that makes sense. You can look at Mecha Base, which is going to be encouraging of brawl, though you can break that. It's less hard locked into brawl than University, for example. So you have that going on. And then you have Downtown, which is solid as well. Some versatility in what you can play there. You mostly see poke dive type comps right now. There's enough cover. There's sort of enough cover to play brawl. Not really. You can force it. You can go use the cubby under the point. It's got a little bit of uniqueness to it again with how much high ground there is around the point on that one. I think just based on the fact that the maps themselves are a little bit more different, I'm probably going to put it over on this side where you've got, hey, this concept of on Downtown, you have a fair amount of high ground looped around in a weird way above the point. The point is off to the side rather than in the middle of the map. And then on Mecha Base, you have this drum thing in the middle of the point that's like cover in the middle of the point, and it's a relatively small point. And whoa, this is sort of a new thing that's different. That I'm willing to, for it being different, give it some extra points and put it at the top of A tier for now. Oasis is a beautiful map regardless of playability. Yeah, I think Oasis is a good map. I mean, you'll notice it's still right up here. Like we're still in A tier right here. This is pretty solid. Finally, someone doing a tier list who understands that the left side is plus and right side is minus. I'm glad that you recognize that, James. It's amazing to me how many people don't. Okay, so we've exhausted our King of the Hill maps, and we've also exhausted our 2CB maps, and we did get an escort map, a payload map onto here in Junkertown. That just sort of snuck its way in here. So let's get through the rest of the pure payload maps here. And the rest of our pure payload maps are going to, let me just arrange this for a second so that I can see them. Oh no, we didn't cover Lijiang Tower. Lijiang Tower. I know Lijiang Tower is a lot of people's second favorite map. I don't really have an issue with Lijiang Tower, but Lijiang Tower is probably the least interesting to me of the maps, and what makes it the least interesting to me is Control Center. Okay, that gives us a basically forced brawl map. Okay, that makes sense. Then we've got Gardens, which is going to be a more mobile map. It doesn't really have high ground for someone like a Winston to work off of, so maybe that's a little bit of a negative. But ultimate, and then you've got Night Market, similar thing. You could brawl there. You could play a poke dive hybrid type thing. But really, what sort of drains it a little bit for me is it's Symmetra Center. Like Symmetra works so well on all three maps, and she can really force two of the maps to be played the same way. I don't like hate Symmetra or anything, and let's be honest, I do give a map points for, hey, now you have to play this map differently. You have to play Junkertown differently than you play King's Row, for example. That's good for both of those maps in my mind. So, like, it's not terrible. It's not like I'm absolutely going to tank this thing for Symmetra being playable on it, but I do think it's a little less diversity in how it's played than the other control maps, and that's going to hurt it. It's not going to hurt it significantly because, again, it's good that you have to play Lijiang Tower differently than you play Anubis, for example. Like, that is good for Lijiang Tower, but it's not as good as something like Ilios. We have a super chat coming in from Adam in Charge for 199 saying, Temporal, legit RC beat you. How do you feel? How do I feel right now? I feel okay. I feel okay. I feel like I probably need to eat something. I'm a little bit hungry, so I'll probably deal with that after this. Yeah. I feel like the video I'm doing is fine, but a little bit on the silly side because obviously maps are going to be so subjective. So there's also that. It's not like, oh, this is the professional coaches. This is really the value from the coach here of exactly what they are. I mean, ultimately, this is going to be subjective. So that's fine. So, yeah. I feel 199 richer than a minute ago. That's true, James. That is true. Thank you for that super chat, Adam. I do appreciate that super chat for 199. Go to McDonald's and order a Big Mac. Tell them you use their internet for Overwatch content. I don't, though. I don't. Why is it silly to have an opinion? We love your opinions. I'm glad. I'm glad that you guys like my opinions. Which is why I'm willing to. Which is why I'm willing to do this, even though this is highly opinion-based content. Okay. So next, we're gonna go ahead and move on here to. We will continue with Escort maps since we already have Junkertown on the board. 199 before taxes. And did I sort all of our pure? We should have at least one more. No, Dorado. There we go. And that as well. Okay, so now we get into our payload maps, and if we're looking at our payload maps, I don't really have an issue going, hey, we look at these, what are the better maps? I'm pretty good with Dorado. Dorado has strategic depth to it. We look at Dorado, it's got lots of different routes that you can potentially take there. It's not quite as simple as it looks. You can't just go, hey, let's run it through mid, let's try to push the cart through the archways here. That's not really going to work very well. You got to go get control of your left side, break it, get control of the bridge thing across, poke from here, go in, poke like that, loop around behind. It's got a lot on first point that you can do. On second point, it's all about controlling that high ground, rotating up, controlling that high ground, going through church and poking from there, going through like this. Capping the end of the point is almost impossible unless you control the high ground, but quite doable if you do. It's a nice, good, deeper battle that levels up as players get better. At low levels, yeah, you're just going to fight over the chokes, you're just going to fight over the card and push it, but it levels up with the player base quite nicely in terms of understanding these power positions absolutely matter. You have to use them. And then it does do something I like, which is as you move past these more open first and second points to third point, it closes in a little. You have a ceiling now. There's a little bit less open space, and something like Brawl becomes a little bit better than it was on the previous 2 points, but it doesn't just like mandate a swap to Brawl. I do like it when Escort points do that, and this is one of the maps that do that. Semitic says, I don't like attack on Dorado. Maybe I'm just bad, but all my rotations feel awkward on that map through first and second. They take a little bit longer. Like, it can be like, hey, you're out of the action for a moment to do your rotation. That's definitely a thing, and it's not weird to feel that way of, oh, I'm not contributing right now. But a rotation is just delayed contribution. And they're strong enough, the positions you get, to absolutely be worth that in many situations. Still want to see Temporal design his ideal Overwatch map using Legos? Maybe. That could be fun. Okay, then we move on to Route 66, and Route 66 is actually going to be my bottom ranked map for Escort, or not my bottom ranked, I guess Junkertown was, but the reason that I've put it like this is it's really too average. Route 66 is really too average. There's high ground, but it's not particularly powerful high ground. It changes from relatively open space on first and second to a more closed space, though still with this time with more powerful high ground. On third, it's actually the Escort map behind Junkertown that Bastion strats tend to work best on. You'll notice that Bastion strats are just garbage on Gibraltar. They don't work terribly well on Dorado either. They don't work over here. They could work here, but second is going to be pretty rough. And really the difference between what makes Bastion strats, and by Bastion strats in this case I really mean pirate ship with the Bastion on the cart, is going to be how much high ground is there that just gives you easy ability to drop on the cart to not let Bastion have a sight line. And Route 66, with its relatively light high ground, it has high ground, but it's not particularly well covered high ground. It's somewhat spread out high ground. It's going to be the weakest of that. It's kind of the most plain, I would argue, of the Escort maps in terms of its features. Third point gets a little more interesting in my mind. You definitely have a nice powerful power position at the very first corner on third point. You have the truck with the mega there. That gets a little interesting as well. But overall, I would look at Route 66 and say it's kind of the most boring, the most plain, the most just standardy Overwatch of them. Okay. So then we move on to Boodle says, hello, I just logged on and refused Numbani to be higher than D. I suggest an F tier. Numbani's fine. I hate to break it to you, but I'm pretty good with Numbani. Route 66 also looks boring. I agree. Route 66 is on the boring side, which is why it's here in B tier. There's nothing like terrible about it, and Escort is inherently a better game mode. Like, I actually think this is a more fun map in terms of, I think this is somewhat of a better designed map, Volskaya, but the reality is this game mode, and the reality of the game mode that's attached to this map is worse than the game mode that's attached to this map. So that's what we're looking at here. Next, we're going to move on, and I'm going to look at Rialto. And I think for Rialto, I'm going to put it... Kind of want to do that? No. I'm going to put Rialto here, top of B tier for now. Rialto's fine. Rialto's a map that encourages a little bit more poke play, especially you can see some good first point bunkers. You've got some relatively long sight lines. People for a while were experimenting with, hey, let's spawn camp to get the extra fight on this map. It's okay. Second point high ground is really, really oppressive, and oppressive in a way that I actually find more annoying than Gibraltar's. Gibraltar's second point high ground is also incredibly oppressive. You have to rotate through one of four tiny chokes that they can all see all four chokes. Those are chokes that don't have any cover, and that absolutely sucks. Rialto turns that up to 11 and goes, you have to rotate across a bridge with no cover the entire time while we have high ground that we can spread a pretty wide angle on. What? What now? So it's hard to get your engine going on second if you get stopped in either direction on Gibraltar, but it's kind of stupid for attackers to get their engine going on Rialto once the cart gets stopped. That said, I do like the strategic depth of, hey, this high ground is relevant, extremely relevant, and has to be solved, but there isn't some like, oh, go do this rotation and that just solves it type thing. It's no, you're going to have to make it across. You can use your own high ground and try to take a poke fight with us, or you can hope that we can't break your shields in time as you rotate across, and if you're on ladder, you're just sort of doomed, and there's no way to get past and then sort of hide once you're past while your team gets past, anything like that. So painful for ladder, painful when teams start getting good. There's a reason you see a lot of second point holds there, and I don't find those second point holds as interesting as I find first or second point holds on Gibraltar. So, maybe that's not fair, but that's what we're looking at. It definitely does get points for encouraging more poke play than you see in most of Overwatch. And in my mind, it actually gets points for third point as well, where third point feels like a very powerful choke for teams that don't know how to break it. But then once teams start understanding, wait, second door here, leads in like this, I can threaten in like this, leads in like this, I can threaten in like this isn't so bad after all. And I like that. I think it's good. Not three very obvious lanes, but three lanes that are very much there that do a good job of breaking what otherwise feels like I'm pushing through this impossible choke right here and it feels so bad. No, it's great. What makes it impossible is the defenders are peeking out here and taking out your backline. Second is rough versus competent hit scan. Yeah, that's kind of the issue with that. I would even be good if they would add some like walk the plank aspect or something on second point that was to the left over where first point mega is. That was, some sort of pier to walk across something, hop across boats, but some other way across that isn't purely movement abilities to just open it up a tiny bit more. But something there would be interesting. Okay. Then we move on to Havana. And Havana, I think, is a better version of this. I'm actually going to go put Havana up in A tier, I think. And let's put Havana up, say, here. I like Havana. Havana is a map that does what I want in terms of going, no, we're pretty much going to demand that you play poke. Obviously, we've seen some spawn camp defenses. That's perfectly fine. But Havana very much goes, no, you cannot just one-trick your way through Brawl. Try playing Brawl on second point Havana. You will not have a good time if you're trying to attack on second point Havana with Brawl. It's a very long sightline map. Obviously, third point, even more so, incredibly long sightlines there, and I like that. I wouldn't like every map to be designed like Havana, but I think Havana does a good job of being in the pool and saying, poke is a way to play the game, poke is going to exist, Brawl is not going to have a particularly good time here, especially on offense, and unless, you're fighting a spawn camping, Brawl defense type thing, and this is going to be a chance for poke to shine, even a little bit into, hey, divest it some tricky rotations to get on them. So this is good. I like what this does for the map pool by being here, by being kind of the top poke heavy map that we've put in the game so far. Third point Havana is rough. That's okay with me. I think there should be some points. Just like Ruins exists, third point Havana exists, there should be points where Widow gets to play in her effective range. The entire map pool shouldn't be who has the best Widow, but who has the best Widow should matter on a few maps, a few points. That's a thing, that's good balance. Thank you. Thank you. I'm glad you like my shirt there, Danielle. Havana is fine, but I'm salty as a support player on the map because it feels a lot harder for me to shut down a Widow carrying a team compared to a DPS or tank. It absolutely is. It's a Widow map, but I'm okay with that. I know it's definitely going to feel bad that, I can't solve the Widow, and it's harder. It's harder to rotate on a Widow. You can obviously snipe it out with Zen right clicks. You can have your own DPS. You can try to sneak your way under with a ball who can't get headshot and rotate around to right side of the end of third, that sort of thing. There's things you can do, but I actually think having something like third point Havana in the map pool is good for the game. I know it sucks to play into. I really do. But again, I think it's right that you have some places where Widow is powerful, just not the whole game where Widow is powerful. Because you have to remember, most of Overwatch is designed around medium range sightlines, and that's kind of why why people were complaining about McCree for so long, for the last, for we'll say 9 months of the last year, 6 months of the last year, something like that, and why we were in general saying, hey, hit scan in general are powerful and maybe a little too powerful, because so much of Overwatch takes place and is designed in such a way around the objective, around the points, for medium range effectiveness. And having something that, no, this is going to be long range effectiveness, just like we have a couple places where, no, this is short range effectiveness, we call them brawl maps, is good, in my opinion. Third should always be rough for the attackers. Right, you're getting to their spawn, that sort of thing. King's Row manages to allow Widow to play at her ideal range without making it GG go next if you have the worst Widow. Not really. I mean, King's Row first does that to a degree, sure. King's Row first does that to a degree, but I don't particularly like that happening on a first point and happening on a first point for attackers, because, oh, their Widow got a pick before she was being respected. Okay, well, they got first. Like, that's actually less interesting to me than, oh, they got a point and now the payload's going to push a little, or they got a point on defense, a pick on defense, and now that takes time off the clock. Like, it's a pretty heavy burden on Kings Row for one Widow pick or two Widow picks to effectively be like, oh, there's first, it's gone, that sort of thing. So I'm not sure I agree with that. Okay. Now we've got, was that the last of our pure payload maps? It looks like it was. Is it just 76's ult that made him undesirable? I would assume he's mid-range hit scan. Maybe I'm wrong. He is mid-range hit scan, and he's incredibly versatile, but he's not good enough at any one thing. So he's got some medium-range hit scan pressure, which is solid. Medium-range hit scan pressure is probably one of the better things that he has going for him, but it's not one-shot potential. He doesn't instantly pick people the way a Roadhog does, the way a Widow does. So he's sustained damage, pretty high sustained damage, but sustained damage. He's not Hanzo. Hanzo can also play at that medium range for one-shot potential. He's got pretty good mobility, but not as good mobility as Tracer, that sort of thing, and he can get chased down and hunted by Tracers. If he's trying to play for that poke damage, a Widow can or a Hanzo can one-shot him, and that's not a particularly good thing in his favor. He does better, generally speaking, on ladder than organized play, where he's going to get less organization around shutting him down. He's not going to get surrounded and dove from 2 or 3 sides where his sprint isn't going to help him, and his generalistness doesn't hold him back as much effectively. So he's pretty good on ladder, but he's not that amazing once A, people get really good enough, and B, once you have the option of doing organized play where people can fill their roles and be, more value than the sum of their parts. If you have to go, I have to be able to do a little bit of everything. I have to be able to take flanks. I have to be able to take shallower off angles. I have to be able to keep up on constant damage pressure. I have to be able to get pickoffs, though not as well as a Hog, a Hanzo, a Widow, that sort of thing. He's good, but again, I could be a Hog, a Hanzo, a Widow, that sort of thing if I need a pickoff. I could be over here as a Tracer or a Sombra if I'm trying to get map control. If I need to hit the hard flanks, I could be a Hog if I need to hit the hard flank. If I'm going for the consistent damage pressure, I'd really probably just use the Hanzo, to be honest. I could use the Ashe, that sort of thing. So Echo, if you're just going for mid-range damage pressure, Echo's going to be, okay, she does that good mid-range damage pressure and then can convert into a diver when you need to. She's definitely got the more powerful ult. He's just sort of outshined. Do I think a damage-boosted soldier is better than a damage-boosted Hanzo or Cassidy? It's pretty good. It's pretty good, but damage boosted Cassidy is just like, let me flash fan and one shot the Winston that's here, which makes Winston really unhappy. What else is going on here? It's good. It's probably overall I'd say, yeah, a little bit better. But if you're gonna bring the damage boost and that, why did you leave Ashe out of that conversation? Becomes my question. And if you're keeping Ash in the conversation, I want Ash. Okay, let's move on. We have one more map type here, and this is going to be hybrid. And we have to decide where to put these. So I know someone is looking for me to put Numbani in F tier, and I can guarantee you that's not going to happen. In fact, I look at Numbani, and I like Numbani quite a lot. I'm perfectly happy to mix Numbani probably into our A tier. I'm even going to put it at the front of our A tier. I like Numbani a lot. Numbani does a good job of going, hey, first point, high ground. It's high ground that's pretty darn good. It's not high ground that absolutely demands that you can't play Brawl Heroes. It'll certainly hurt you a little bit for playing Brawl Heroes, in that you'll have split high grounds that people like Reinhardt and Zarya can't jump back and forth between, and that does hurt them. But they're playable. And then as you get onto something like third point, those types of heroes start looking a lot better, but not so good that you absolutely have to swap into them and you're throwing by not swapping into them, that sort of thing. It has good high ground. It has 4 different routes in that are all meaningfully different routes. It takes advantage of the ability and in some case the necessity of the attackers to actually loop behind first point, not just to take different lanes in, but to actually loop behind first point, to go up coast and then circle behind to push an Ana from behind, or to go out towards second, dive past effectively, and then get a health back, and then come back in, and then have a dive coming in from that direction. So I like a lot what happens on first point there. Second point can sometimes get going a little bit too fast. That happens in general for lower levels of play. Second points can be a little too snowbally. But overall, I'd say solid map, decent number of spots you can stop it, good lanes and how it works. You have good, strong high ground on first, second, and the very beginning of third, and then you've got much weaker high ground at the end of third, which, hey, that gives the map some pretty good variety there in terms of how it works. It does make finishing the map quite difficult for attackers compared to some places, because there's not great, strong, amazing positioning that they can take to checkmate the end of the map to finish it, but that's fine. Okay, then we move on to our next one, and which one do we want to put up here next? Let's get Blizzard World, and I'm going to put Blizzard World up here for similar reasons in a similar way. I'm probably going to put Blizzard World over here next to Havana, and I'm going to put Blizzard World here for a very similar reason. Blizzard World allows some good comp diversity. It's really set up more as a poke map with pretty long sight lines, especially on second there. You've got some really long sight lines you can play. You can absolutely play vertical, but you do have a little more difficulty transitioning between high ground, especially for attackers, and low ground. It really insists that attackers understand the importance of taking high ground with their path in there, with that push through the stairs. And, at lower levels they don't, and they push cart, and that's okay because the defenders don't really get it either. But it's another one of those maps, kind of like Dorado, that levels up with the player base and goes, hey, this top route, this top fight is really important. You guys gotta get it right. This is how it works. Then you move on to an enclosed third point with a little bit more of a, hey, now it's some tighter turns, that sort of thing. You might want to move into something that's a bit more brawly. Overall, it's a good map. The knock on Blizzard would, of course, be that cap at the end of second point is frustratingly challenging, we would say, for the attackers. At the very end of second point, if the defenders get a stop, that's much harder than, say, Numbani, for attackers to keep throwing themselves at to try to finish, to try to get a fight win. That's a little bit of a knock on it, in my opinion. Yeah, you have a little bit of a take your poison there. Do you want second to just get snowballed through a little too often, or do you want second to be sort of uncappable at the end there? And I think the Numbani balance is better, where they're using their third point spawn, or King's Row, where they're using their third point spawn to try to deal with second, as opposed to Blizzard World, where their second point spawn is right at the end of second, and attacker spawn, has to go quite a bit of distance there. Numbani is one of your favorite maps as a DPS. I believe it. Okay, then we move on to Hollywood. Thinking about Hollywood, I got no real issues with Hollywood. I'd probably put it somewhere around here-ish. Hollywood is a fine map. Hollywood obviously has good high ground on second point that's relevant. It now has the elevators that work. Back when it had the elevators that you just had to hope you were there at the right time to take them, I would have rated this lower, but all elevators had that problem originally. Now, if you just step on an elevator, it waits at the bottom, and when you step on it, it takes you up. And that helps. That makes that high ground more relevant. It can be a little bit annoying that it's a bit challenging to challenge that high ground. It sort of forces some things where you either turtle on cart trying to move it along as attackers, or you try to push a group up elevator, and pushing a group up elevator really sucks against a team that is paying attention. But you can do things like hit them with a ball from behind, go up the elevator on the other building, and have someone poke them from back there to make it a little bit easier. So it's reasonable. Putting good strong poke comps, things like that on top can be very challenging for really much to get into. But hey, if they're good strong poke comps, you run dive. If you run dive, you don't necessarily need the elevators to get up. Okay, we've solved this in a way. So Hollywood, fine map. First point, it's okay. I'd argue the issue with first point is that it mandates, similar to Numbani, but it mandates that you're really willing to send people around. You're really willing to send people through security to rotate around to come behind if you're properly going to take that map. Some of the angle differences between attacking down main or looping. Let me draw this. Attacking effectively down main like this, or looping behind past Mega to go like this. Like, there's really not enough angular difference. At least attackers do get some meaningful high ground that they can take stairs up to have a poke fight. That is interesting, that you can have you can have a poke fight between two comps on this. You can run different types of comps to fight for this point. That's solid. We've seen a lot of bunker holds on this point. We've seen, obviously, brawl holds on this point. It's a solid map. I don't really have an issue with it. Then we move on again. We're going to get our Eichenwald. And Eichenwald is fine. It does what maps are supposed to do in terms of... Yeah, we'll just put this here. It does what maps are supposed to do in terms of, hey, second point looks quite a bit different, and I like that, than first and third point. Third point is going to be, you should play Brawl, and it's going to do that, but second point is going to have enough high ground to make you question, wait, do we really want to be on full Brawl heroes? Not having the ability to retake high ground easily, that sort of thing, is challenging. Now, you can rotate through the castle, you can use the castle as a closed space, that sort of thing, but the cart doesn't push through the castle on second. So you have to figure out what you're going to do there. Are you going to go in cover, push the cart, go back in cover, that sort of thing? Are you going to go, hey, we'll play from on top of the castle on defense, and then when we drop to go wipe them, will you then stay down there? Will you then reset back up to high ground? You have decisions to make. It's a little bit extreme for my taste in terms of the second point being different than how you might want to play first and third point. But it's fine. It's a reasonably good map. I probably would have rated it a bit worse when it had this super choke, but now it doesn't anymore, so that's good. We're good with it. Then we get through to King's Row, and I'm good with King's Row. I don't think King's Row is the best map in the game, like many, 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 many people think, but I look at King's Row and go, hey, King's Row is a good map. King's Row is a map that we can look at. I could put it here. I could move it down a little. I think I'm going to put it here, and the reason I'm going to put it here is it does a good job of, it does not absolutely mandate that you play Brawl, but it's one of the maps in the pool that says, we strongly recommend you play Brawl. It's going to have some shorter sight lines. In some ways, the high ground is going to be less powerful, at least at portions of the map, and I want that. I want some maps in the pool that are really going to highly encourage you to play in a more dives playstyle. I want some maps in the pool that are going to play a little bit more for longer sight lines, which we found over here. And I'm going to want some maps in the pool that lead into Brawl as well. And I actually think King's Row enforces Brawl less well than I think most people think it does, but it is probably the map that does the best job of enforcing Brawl as a whole. You have things like Village, for example, which can do perhaps a better job of enforcing it on a single point, but enforcing Brawl for the map, going, hey, people are probably going to play Brawl for the map, King's Row is probably currently the map that does the best job of doing that. So I'm good with that. I'd look at something like this and say, hey, I like my maps. They work something along these lines. If you guys have thoughts, throw them up in chat. If you have thoughts in the future, your future self is talking to past temporal, feel free to leave a comment. Tell me, Mitch, which map you would have rated much higher, much lower, that sort of thing. Semitic says Temporal is a dive fan. He can't handle us brawl enjoyers. Kings Row is my favorite map. Well, I mean, I'll pull out some Hammond and we can have some fun on Kings Row. No, I mean, I like playing Rhine as well, but it, Kings Row doesn't actually force you to play. Kings Row doesn't actually remotely force you to play Brawl. I did that in my Kings Row map guide. You can see Kings Row, you can absolutely play Brawl on it, but if you guys want to check out my map guide series, which is something that accompanies this nicely, I do have a series of map guides. Kings Row, I believe, is the most recent map guide we've done, and we did talk about how teams use dive, how teams use ball comps on it, where dives get hit, how it's not as much of a Brawl forced point as a lot of people tend to think. You can hit good rotations on a team as they're trying to rotate through high ground on first. If they try to touch point, you can touch point with ball and then leave and have a lot of high ground surrounding first to just chip them down. As they walk through second, you can loop around behind them. You can have people hit from the alleyway. As you go into third, there is high ground up there, and there's high ground above the Horseshoe Mega that really only the dive heroes are going to be able to access, things like that. So don't get me wrong, it's probably the most brawly map, but it does not. Kings Row does not do as good a job of breaking dive as Gibraltar does of breaking brawl. It's an unsaid degree. It's an unsaid agreement to run brawl. It's the law temporal. It's not though. It's not. I think we need a throwers tier to rate the best maps to throw on. Maybe that's the solution. You agree quite heavily with this, especially Gibraltar being first. There you go, Daniel. I know, CGS. Kings Row is the most popular pick whenever it's in the map pool. There's a reason it gets called Scrims Row. If it's in the map pool, it's very likely a team's going to take you there, even if you played Lijiang Tower first and you beat them on Brawl on Lijiang Tower. It's wild how much people are like, oh, we're going to go to Kings Row. And, well, I guess you have lots of practice on it, but, like, this isn't a good matchup for you guys. What are you doing? That sort of thing. Kings Row is great because all comp styles are very much viable. I don't. Yeah, okay. I don't really know that I consider Orisa comps to be great. You can certainly play Orisa on Kings Row. Some of those short sightlines on second really. Some of them are long enough to be fine for her. Some are shorter and not to her favorite. And you run into a bit of a similar problem on third, where some of the sightlines are long enough. Like that first sightline is long enough on third, but that second sightline is too short. Things like that. But yeah, it's doable. Can you play Brawl on Gibraltar second if you TP Brawl on the ship? Um, yeah. You need to rotate in from high ground, but you can absolutely protect a rotation in from high ground. Like you could go in high ground left side and then TP to the top of the ship, and that would be a good way to play in there. Yeah, that would be solid. Which map do you think is the greatest skill gap in how well low MMR versus high MMR pros play on it? Hmm. Possibility. 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 I'd say these are the ones that jump out at me. Possibility for the biggest. And most of it has to do with the evolving understanding of positioning. High ground, high ground, high ground, high ground. Junkertown has a little less to do with that and a little more to do with, let's be honest, like snipers in high MMR play make you play the game quite a bit differently than they do in low MMR play, and that changes things. And that's really what we're talking about on Junkertown. But I'd say these are the ones. If I had to do a single one, probably one of these two. It could be this, but it's really second points high ground that's so meaningful on that, whereas the high ground on... I feel like it's more impactful high ground on this. That's not quite fair. It's not more impactful high ground on this. It's tough. It could be any of these three. And it would be any of these three if we're not counting the hey widow gap, the like you just have to play differently when widows are that good. Gibraltar absolutely has it, and it's absolutely meaningful on first and second, which could make the argument that it's more than these three because of it, because these three are mostly about how second point gets played so differently. But people catch on sooner that high ground matters in Gibraltar. They catch on at that at a lower MMR than they do for these three maps. Like this is brutal, but you only really get to do it after one fight, significantly one fight, so I'm not going to consider it as the one. So we get into one of these two, and I think it takes people a little bit longer to catch on how important the high ground is on second Blizzard World than this. So I'm going to go with Blizzard World. Someone on Reddit posted that all games at all Ilios played the same way. Tim Pearl even did Divad Riva that post. Which do I think is the best map for new players to learn on? I think the best map for new players to learn on is you don't really get a choice because you queue up for either quick play or competitive play, and it takes you to where you have to go. Like, you don't really get a choice. You're not going to go, oh, I'm a new player, so let's scrim. Scrimming is not your best use of time if you're a new player. Using the tools that are there, which is quick play, for example, is your best use of time because you just need reps understanding the game, seeing the abilities, getting how they work, that sort of thing. And for that, you're going to use the tools that are there. You're not going to go especially work on Route 66 or anything like that. I mean, Route 66 is a pretty generic map, so I could say sure, Route 66, but I don't really think answering that question has value. Probably Paris and Horizon because non-pro players don't play it. There you go. There you go. Right. You need to learn every map played. You need to learn where all the health packs are, all that stuff. Ilios is a map you find annoying to play on, so I would put it high B tier. That's fine. I mean, I think I pretty well defended why I put these two Koth maps in this top tier, and it's because they really do get you three different styles of play for the three different maps, and I think that's good. Okay, let me catch up on chat here. Let me scroll back through, see if there's anything important I missed. If you guys are enjoying the content, please do drop a like. Consider subscribing if you haven't already done so. If you're interested in more map knowledge, the best place to get it, and one of the really best things for learning Overwatch in general, learning to take your Overwatch to the next tier, is my map series. We talk pretty extensively about lanes in that series. We talk about how to attack maps, power positions, how map design on the different maps encourages or disincentivizes different styles. So that's a really good series to check out on this channel. James says, I love playing Oasis Uni with old Orisa because nobody respects the hole because it doesn't eliminate you. It's a long delay to get back, though, for a lot of heroes. Okay. Hey, Sham, how you doing? For those that don't know, Sham was with Northeastern. Sham still helps out with Northeastern from time to time, but Sham has been with Northeastern both as a flex support player a few years ago, and then last year as an assistant coach. Still helps out from time to time. So, what my qualifications? I think you know my qualifications, Sham. I think you know them. And which map aren't you liking? Havana is A tier. Yeah. So again, when we get into Havana A tier, what I'm liking about Havana is it's doing a good job of forcing some diversity in the player base in terms of playstyle. I like that we have a situation where we're highly encouraging poke to exist in the map pool. We're highly encouraging dive to exist in the map pool. We're somewhat highly encouraging brawl to exist in the map pool. I like when the balance is handled by the maps letting different heroes and different types of playstyles be powerful rather than just buffing the bejesus out of the brawl heroes until brawl's meta or dive's meta or whatever the case is. I like the balance being tight enough that the map differences can shine through, but for that to work, the maps have to be meaningfully different, and Havana gives us some of the longest sightlines in the game. Nope. Negative. Negative blunt. Poke maps, there's dive and brawl is where it's at. I think you mean dive is where it's at? Okay. Okay. That's going to go ahead and do it. If you guys are enjoying the content, drop a like, and I will see you in the next one. Thanks. Temporal out.